My guest today is an old friend. Dr. Joe Gallenberger is a psychotherapist in practice for many years. He's also the author of 4 books, Brothers Forever, Liquid Luck, Heaven is for Healing, and Inner Vegas. In addition to being a senior trainer at the Monroe Institute, he's also the creator of 2 of its many programs called MC Squared and Peak Week. Joe, it's good to see your face after all these years.
Nice to see you, Mark. I think it's been decades.
It has been. I'm getting long in
Yes.
the tooth. You look great.
Well, right back at you.
Thank you. Well, we could sit around here and pat each other on the back and talk about the old stories. This conversation is obviously about consciousness and how to expand it, and there's obviously a lot of rabbit holes for us to go down. So why don't we start with that before we launch into telling some of the old stories, which I'm sure some of the listeners might want to hear. God knows we have a lot of them. My first question is to introduce you to the audience. How long have you been a psychotherapist?
Mark, was in psychotherapy practice for 30 years and quit that, I don't know, 15 years or so ago to work more in the consciousness field directly.
And what branch of psychotherapy did you adhere to during your practice?
I would put it mostly on a transpersonal.
Mm-hmm.
It was very eclectic. Was trained Freudian and behaviorist and existential, lots of different schools. And I would pick in things that I found relevant to the individual situation, but mostly around that idea of when we say transpersonal, the idea of meaning in life is important, that one respects the journey, and it's more in what we would call health psychology rather than making everything a disease.
Right.
So that you weren't looking so much to interpret everything like, here's a bad problem, let's call it anxiety, let's get rid of it, but more let's explore that as why that's the anxiety's there on your journey, and in the working that way, most times you would see that anxiety relieved, and symptom relief is great, but also what you doing, why, and it might be genetic factors. I practice pretty holistic, so food and genetics and environment and all that come into play as well, because we're pretty sensitive creatures.
A pretty holistic approach to psychotherapy as opposed to clinical, take this drug and you'll be fine.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was it that attracted you to the Monroe Institute? Was it your work as a psychotherapist?
No, it was really earlier, probably by 6 or 7 years old. I was having what you could call oneness experiences. I'd be a point of consciousness and one with everything, and I'd be usually laying on my bed when this would happen, and there'd be an ecstasy state. I didn't talk to anybody about this. I had enough presensions to know they probably would call me crazy. I was being raised Roman Catholic, so I began to study all the Christian mystic literature. And so as I got to be older, this whole area of consciousness intrigued me. So in college, besides the clinical psychology stuff, I was studying Eastern religions, mainly through a Jesuit priest who had been over in India for 20 years. And began to do controlled out of body in college. So as that was going on, then became aware of Monroe Institute through Bob Monroe's books. His second book came out, read that, found out there was a place you could go to play with this. And so I got up there about, I guess, 35 years ago now, and became a trainer. So I've been a trainer up there for 30 years. And I split my time between clinical practice and going up there and working as a facilitator of consciousness groups up there.
See, I'm learning all kinds of new stuff about you, and I thought I knew you pretty well. So I didn't know you were raised Roman Catholic. We share that in common. I didn't know that you studied Gnosticism and that branch of Christianity. When did you first have your first out-of-body experience?
Again, probably around that same age. And actually, Mark, I went to a monastery when I was 14 for 2 years in silence.
It's another thing I didn't know about you.
Also studied Egyptian Hermetic principles of, meditation and code magic. So this area has been of interest to me for a good while.
And how did that square with your Catholic upbringing?
Totally fine in my own head.
You didn't.
Not so fine in other people's.
Right. I know the feeling. It scared the bejesus out of me the first time I had a transcendent state. I was like, oh my God, what is happening to me? Now the Catholicism didn't really take. I was kind of an agnostic at, I don't know, age 7, 8, jive for me, even as a kid. But, some of that stuff I think stuck with me anyway. From a therapeutic perspective, do you think that there's any benefits in exploring altered states of consciousness?
Very much so. I think man has a built-in tremendous desire for transcendence. And we could do that through alcohol or drumming or many kind of things. Exploring altered states of consciousness without using drugs helps us. Why we'd have that desire for transcendence, I think, is it's a good way to get an overview of what the heck is going on, even if we are in an Aboriginal tribe. And we then would rely on the shaman to do that, if you will.
Sure.
But for our own self-empowerment now in modern day, to get a perspective beyond daily grind and the appearances of reality, I think have a lot of mental health benefits. We don't take things so seriously, including death, and because of learning about out of body and the idea that our consciousness may survive physical death, to the importance of loving kindness and compassion toward ourselves and others. So in many ways, an exploration of altered states gentles some of the ravages of current Western culture in the modern age, in my opinion. So it can be very useful. It can be boiled down to, hey, I can help you learn how to relax in 10 minutes with Monroe sound science type of exercises, and therefore somebody in psychotherapy who might have taken months to get over panic attacks might experience relief in 20 minutes.
Right.
So with anxiety and depression and many of the things that come into the therapeutic milieu as a psychotherapeutic tool, because it's very non-dogma. You could use it. We talked about Catholic, but as you know, up in Monroe, Protestants, atheists, fundamental ministers, Buddhists, Republicans, Democrats, everybody comes up. Absolutely. And they're respected, and there's no set of beliefs they have to adopt. That's very useful in psychotherapy as well, because you have a very egalitarian view, hopefully as a therapist, that you embrace everyone's reality and their upbringing and their situation. So this technological tool of meditation and therefore altered states really fits well with that.
Well, let's expand on that a little bit. These recordings that I've been making for decades now have been used by therapists to access the subconscious and lead to transpersonal or superconscious experiences. Have you any ideas on how that can be helpful therapeutically?
Yeah, just as a participant up in Monroe and in other meditative systems, as well as a trainer there, all of which you mentioned, we could call parts of our awareness that we are usually not so conscious of, including our digestive process and, our immune system, and many things run outside of our conscious attention. But as we pay more attention to our bodies, to what's going on in our subconscious, there's great wisdom there about, I think it's one of the best forms of guides one could have in life, better than, if some big old guide came to you in some spirit form, your own awareness of your own consciousness, if you extend it into what we could call total self or higher self, then potentially you could access the wisdom of all your other lives
Mm-hmm.
and universal consciousness, perhaps all life, in all forms, human, non-human, etc. Anyway, consciousness has expressed and experienced itself. That's quite a wisdom pool you could swim in
It is.
for guidance in making decisions and how do you live your life and what would be important. And it tends to reprioritize off of some of the hypnosis of culture,
Mm-hmm.
much like even if somebody has a heart attack, usually they come out of that going, I value my family more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to let running after the buck ruin my health. My friendships are more important. I want to do, 10 other things that hypnotized on the rabbit wheel of just trying to make a living
Mm-hmm.
might have been ignored. So I think it's highly healthy. Doesn't mean that it couldn't be distressful.
Mm-hmm.
When people say, oh, meditate and you'll feel fine, I think that's a disservice. When you meditate and open up, you may find out that you need to change a job or a marriage
Mm-hmm.
or something like that that is no longer serving you. And that could cause you some distress because on a practical life chain, that could have consequences involving lawyers, etc. That could be difficult. But be that as it may, at least you would know where your heart is
Mm-hmm.
and your higher mind is. I'm using a lot of terms loosely, Mark, because some people would say there's no total self because there's no self. Uh, but within this model, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
of expanding your awareness beyond what you're usually aware of, I think it really is very helpful in resetting your priorities to things that could be healthy for you and healthy for the planet, frankly, going forward as a culture.
I agree, of course, but I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm just a flaky artist. So, it's easy for me to say such things or make such assertions without anybody getting upset with me because they can write me off. You, however, are in a totally different chair. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit later on. But what you just said was quite a mouthful, in my opinion. A lot of wisdom there, and I'd like to unpack it for the audience. Most of what I heard you say had to do with using transcendent states to access the thing that we might call the total self, which is not exactly accessible with the conscious waking mind unless we approach life with a certain degree of mindfulness, which, would have to include some form of understanding that there is a self that exists beyond what we recognize as ourselves as we walk through our daily lives. So we're talking about transcendent experiences that can help one do that and get to know your own inner guidance. But you also spoke of body wisdom and being able to track one's feelings, perhaps. Would you expand on that a little bit more and that kind of mindful approach?
Yeah, I guess I'll give you a little cosmology. This is just mine. I
Please.
think we are designed as beings with infinite capacity. And one of the things is to get infinite energy and unlimited quality and quantity directly from source, however you define that as
Mm-hmm.
Atman or God or whatever.
Right. Universe.
Um, Using the term Atman from Hindu indicating a non-personal, really doesn't care, good, evil, and all of that.
Right.
And then breaking down more into religious concepts where there would be a loving God with some personality, he or she,
Mm-hmm.
what have you. But we're designed to get energy that way
Mm-hmm.
and to fill ourselves with overflowing with that. And within that, we have tremendous ability to heal the physical body energetically,
Mm-hmm.
many things. Usually we cut that off, that flow, and we're energy starved beings. And we get our energy then try to from other people by being the good boy, the bad boy, the good girl, the bad boy,
Mm-hmm.
girl, the rescuer of the mess, different roles.
All the
And
archetypes.
that energy is not as high quality.
Right.
Um, and within that, one thing that tends to happen is we begin to diminish our body awareness and our emotional awareness
Mm-hmm.
to fit a role.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be the good father, provider, whatever, soldier. And so we deny a lot of who we are
Mm-hmm.
to fit into a role to get energy.
Mm-hmm.
Not only money, that's one form of energy, but approval, attention.
Mm-hmm.
So as we open up and transcend that narrowed view of self, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and we access more of that higher energy flow,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes easier to begin to see the body not as an inconvenience, but as an absolute miracle
Mm-hmm.
of guidance and energy. And the same for our emotional life.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very inconvenient to our roles, but very convenient on our spiritual journey
Mm-hmm.
to be in touch with those things. So is that making sense? That's
Oh,
kind of the direction I'm coming from.
I'm right there with you. I'm just
Okay.
love hearing your thoughts. I already know my own, so I'm not here to interview myself, right?
Yes.
So I am assuming that your first awakenings to that, above and beyond the Joe you knew at that time, began with your out-of-body experiences, and that, of course, led you to find out something about Bob Monroe. And Bob Monroe is now a legend that both you and I knew pretty well. What was your experience of working with him in hindsight?
I came in probably in the last decade or so of his life,
Mm-hmm.
and I found him a very interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
He believed in a predator-prey system, and he was not going to be the prey.
Right.
He had a lot of business acumen,
Mm-hmm.
and yet, I'd meet him, and he'd be in a pair of shorts, and his legs had all kinds of scratches on them. I said, "What's that up with?" Well, he's writing his books, and he's let his cats get on his lap and knead his flesh as they settle down. And things like that bespoke a gentleness
Mm-hmm.
and a compassion. He did not in person talk much about, for example, the word love.
Mm-hmm.
Yet on page 239 of his second book, he has a big title on the top, Super Love,
Mm-hmm.
and he says the main reason, if not the only reason, to come into physical incarnation is to learn about super love and become a first order generator thereof.
Mm-hmm.
Super love was his word for transpersonal love, let's say,
Agape.
beyond agape,
Right.
even. And so he was in touch with what we call a few minutes ago, the meaning of being here,
Mm-hmm.
I think in a very good way from my point of view. Highly creative guy. I met him at a time when he was going, "Joe, I'm filled with ideas and creativity, but my physical body is starting to be a drag. I can't carry my own wood in." Then his beloved wife died, and so he was having the loneliness of that, and was with him more in the time where he was beginning to be a little ambivalent about being here, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and had an urgency to get the word out there to people and to continue to develop new projects. And yet he was ready to go, quote, home to a grander home there. He loved the earth. He loved flying in gliders. He loved looking at nature outside, the foxes and the crows. So he was not an aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
but he was in touch with things that were even beyond what he would call local traffic.
Right. He saw things through an energetic perspective. And, I remember being one of his beta readers of Ultimate Journey, and we were talking about this predator-prey system that he wanted to elaborate on. And I looked at him and I said, Bob, and I was 28 years old, 29 years old. I was pretty young, and I got to know Bob as friends. So, we could just talk. And I said, Bob, in that mindset, the young eat the old. You don't really want to go down that hole, do you, in your writings? Because people are listening to you, and try to uplift it a little bit. He was an enigmatic character, and I loved him dearly, and I know you did as well. So
I think we could agree, what put him up above many was I never saw him move into the guru role,
yeah.
even though where people were enamored with his writings.
Mm-hmm.
And he continually emphasized, this is my belief.
Mm-hmm.
I would like you to give you tools that you could go find out for yourself, your own knowns versus beliefs.
Right.
And he felt there was tremendous power in knowing it yourself.
Yeah.
And that was very in line with my philosophy then and continues to be.
Yeah. It's a good philosophy. And I know his motivation for that was to not have to be accountable and responsible. He believed in authority and accountability and responsibility with authority. And he understood that there was a good deal of gravitas that his words would carry in the souls of other people. And I always applauded him for turning that back. He did it to me personally many, many times. You know, I did ask him to slip me the answer to something. And he'd just go, "Kid, I'm just a guy. You know me. We eat cheeseburgers. We hang out. We smoke cigarettes. We're very human. You know, I'm not some guru.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to get to Focus 15. Go there and take a left. Ask the question of yourself. You'll figure it out." I always loved that about him. So while you were at TMI during one of the Lifeline programs, I believe, you had the unique experience which prompted you to write your book, Brothers Forever. It's quite a read. I read it a long, long time ago when it was released. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about the story of your experience and what led you to write the book?
Yeah, so I take my Gateway and Guideline, that was all in the programs available, very quickly back to back, and then Lifeline was coming along, and I was in the first Lifeline. And the program had numbers of things in it. The Dolphin Energy Club was introduced as a way to heal self and others. I think healing into your full potential, not just a sore knee. And also to, in Bob's terms, develop some death insurance for yourself and loved ones, to be able to translate from this physical activity to your next level of existence when the time came to drop the physical body. And so Focus 21 through 27 levels were introduced for the first time to participants there. And I was very excited to go up there. Went up and found you don't have to go out of body to do that work, to help other people who are in transition, who have dropped the physical body, and do what we could call soul rescue work, of help folks who may not be aware they've dropped the physical or stuck in a belief or emotional pattern kind of tied more to the earth consciousness. So we went through the week, and we ended up experiencing all kinds of holy glee, is what we ended up calling it. You would see somebody machine gunned in a village in Vietnam, and yet you would then be with them in spirit as they rejoined ancestors, often mother or father, and felt the joy and the love of that reunion of them into spirit. And so you were bouncing back and forth, but left with a feeling of the magnificence and compassion of the universe, if you will. So I sailed through the week and got home and actually did a workshop that weekend with my brother Pete's son called Excursion, 2-day introduction to Monroe work. And that Monday I got a call and my brother Pete had committed suicide. And so the Lifeline trainers and the first group, including myself, triangulated on my brother Pete and followed him in his journey those first few days afterward. I've since written a book recently called Heaven is for Healing, following what he's done in the last 25 years on the other side, and how they triage people on the other side depending on the type of death and what the person needs to orient and heal there. And what it did for me, which put me on a path to understand manifestation better, of how can a good man, which he was, honest, hardworking, intelligent, not have an easy life. So why do bad things happen to good people? For him, it was he didn't feel deserving, and he felt very fearful of having power. And that played out in powerlessness in work and in relationships. So all my Inner Vegas adventure workshops we've talked about is really designed on making an ever-increasing yoga of love to become ever more that this place can be a paradise for you and the people around you. And had all started with the Lifeline work, being able to communicate. The first thing he sent over was a huge sign to me. He had a good sense of humor, like a parking sign, no parking, but it said no judgment with a big red line through it.
Right.
He was so relieved. He did die hoping there was a merciful God rather than a judgmental one. And Lifeline has become I've trained, I don't know, dozens and dozens now over those years. It's a really fascinating process. You'll see somebody will meet their father as a lump of energy over there, just looks like a lump, and breathe energy into it. They become aware it's their dad. And they say, Dad, haven't you seen angels and light and everything? He says, oh, yeah, but I'm hiding. I don't want to go to judgment. Because in that father's view, judgment could result in everlasting hell for all eternity. That's a pretty heavy belief system. And so I think Lifeline's very much in line with Bob Monroe feeling our beliefs confine us. Our traditional cultural beliefs confine us, whether we're Italian, German, or Irish, or what.
Right.
And that we have other beliefs that could even confine us when we drop the physical body. And Lifeline is a terrifically compassionate and elegantly designed way to reclaim parts of yourself from this life. Say you're in second grade and the teacher says, Johnny, color between the lines, you'll never be an artist. Then you might shut down your artistic ability for this whole lifetime.
Absolutely.
So Lifeline, you can work with things from this life and from other lives of your own, and then other lives of other people in your soul group. Let's use that word. Writing the book, then I want to get back to that. First reason was personal. I knew I didn't want to bury the grief of my brother. So I wrote even poetry and some poetry in the book. And I wanted to understand this and stay very open-hearted and conscious during the process of grieving. As I began to write the book, I found out that our culture is terrifically negative to suicide. Back in the 1700s in New Orleans, for example, I took a ghost tour down there. They said when somebody suicided, they put their body on a wagon wheel and wore off the head and tail and feet and all, and then cut all the pieces and fed it to the alligators in unconsecrated land, so that because the swamp was unconsecrated, so the demons could torture that being for all eternity. In Roman times, they would kill the entire family and take all the property. Even in Middle Ages times, they had that. Still, in many, many countries, suicide is a felony. It's hard to punish somebody once they exited. So we have this very dark attitude about suicide, and yet it's in the shadow. In our culture now, it's seldom talked about. I've been on probably 500 radio shows, and very well received, if I do say so myself. When I wrote the Heaven is for Healing book about suicide, there were only maybe 4 shows of those that would discuss that on air. I felt like I needed to write the book to say to people, every drop of experience is treasured by the other side. All death leads to light. And yet write the book in a way that doesn't incentivize suicide, because you still have to deal with your issues. You know, you might have great energy and compassion and insight over there to deal with them. They may give you a chance to rest a bit, but you still have to deal with your issues as a soul. And it's so ravaging to the people around you who are left here with what it could have, should have thoughts and what they could have done differently to keep you here. 25 years later, when I talked to my brother in spirit, he was telling me how much it meant to him to have me in his life and how much I helped him. And I said to my brother, Pete, regardless of your suicide and every screw up you made in objective physical reality here, you were still valued and treasured and a light in my life and in your family's life. And I could sense he could not still hear that. And Spirit came in, his guide, saying, Joe, we're still working with them. to heal that, to be able to see his terrific value. So you don't escape something from suicide, but neither do you go into an everlasting hell situation. And let's just break it down very personal to my mom. Her beloved son dies. Now she has to think of him as in burning hell, with her not being able to do anything about that.
Right.
By my pointing to her the Lifeline work and the Monroe work, even the possibility of what I was saying might be true helped her a lot, not to be totally bereft on her own. So I think the Lifeline work is highly important. I think the Having Them Is for Healing book, I've gotten messages from around the world how parents were just devastated in reading the book. Now they felt there was some possible light in the situation, some possible hope in the situation.
Well, there's an awful lot to unpack in what you just said. We can go down so many different routes. First of all, I remember the loss of Pete and the impact that it had on you. I remember that Lifeline. Of course, I was the recording engineer there that put that program together for Bob at the time. And we could have 2 or 3 shows and discussions about what you just said. But I'm going to say that the impact of what you just mentioned was not lost on me. And we'll pick it up again at another time. I'd like to talk a little bit more about what you've been doing since then. You've authored Liquid Luck and Inner Vegas. Tell the audience what those books are about.
Well, at Monroe and Gateway, their premier program, I was taught to experiment. And one of the ways I experimented is somebody had a headache, and I thought, gee, I think if I touched their shoulder, their headache could go away, and it did. And that was interesting to me. And later I was helping Bob Monroe develop a program called Lifespan 2000.
I remember it.
And we had a gaming night to practice our new commands. And in there, I found myself going into that same state, which I would call an energy healing state. Hands warm, heart open, grounded to the earth, connected to spirit. And I could roll whatever I wanted on dice. 7 sevens in a row. And that intrigued me as a psychologist because that's very studyable. So I went to Princeton University Labs, PEAR. I think you've had some discussions with some of their folks, and found I could do psychokinesis strongly, and so it was real and I could do it. And I wanted to get a black belt in this because I felt it was the same energy as we use in manifestation and the same energy as we use in energy healing. So I went to Vegas because we know the dice are neutral, and slot machines, we know they're regulated, and I blew that out of the water. I got things 1.6 billion to 1 by chance on roulette, 200 million to 1 by chance on slots, and it seemed like a very positive thing. Manifestation took off in my life. So I started workshops in it, and we had people wake up second day of the workshop pain-free from post-polio syndrome for the first time in 20 years, etc. So after a little bit, I developed MC Squared at Monroe, where we did dice rolling, but also lighting light bulbs with our hands, growing seeds. We'd have 1.5-inch root growth in 2 minutes in our hands, bending metal, not the easy kind, but the real hard stainless, as feedback paths to show you your power. If you take the energies of spirit and total self and bring them in here into the physical, we could manifest lots of things that we weren't. We've had people raise nitrogen content in soil, measurable. What would the world be like with no need for nitrogen fertilizer? So this took me on a manifestation journey. I started at Monroe, ET phone home. Wanted to be out of body, off a planet. And I realized, hey, if I can come and go from the physical, how about using those higher energies to help things here? So I've become kind of the big X, where you're connected to spirit, connected to earth, and they meet in your heart. And within that, tremendous good can be done. And with that, MC Squared was developed. And we've been doing those there. The people at University of Virginia developed Department of Perceptual Studies have studied the data from MSC squared for years now about how we can use psychokinesis to affect matter and in the form of this metal bending and other things. And we're getting statistically significant results and very weird EEGs when you have a 128 lead EEG on Joe Gallenberger's head here. And we're doing psychokinesis, they go into funny patterns. So we're beginning to see the smoking gun. What does the brain look like when we're doing psychokinesis, when we're doing some of this transcendental work of transcending normal consciousness? So that's another topic.
Yeah, it is. And we need to go down that rabbit hole of manifestation. I know there are a lot of people who are very interested in this topic. And I read online that you're considered an expert in this topic now. I assume that you have retired well, learned a lot about the principles of manifestation, and created your reality through the power of consciousness and its relationship to energy. So what I just said about my experience, that somehow PK, Psy, the way in which we participate in creating reality is about the relationship of consciousness to this thing called energy. It's an assumption on my part. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, but I think most people are estimating or putting too much energy into the idea of the mental. For me,
by mental, you're talking about
let's
consciousness?
take the movie The Secret. You visualize it and it becomes so.
Right.
To me, the mind is like the steering wheel of a car. It sets intention like a steering wheel would set direction. But the car goes nowhere without gas. And the best gas that I know of is the energy of unconditional love. So for me, I'm bringing in and this may go back to very early in the show when we were talking about ecstasy states that were listed in the Catholic saints. There's a book called Wings of Ecstasy. 16th century, he was put through the Inquisition twice, everything very well documented. He could go, levitate for an hour when something was there. He would also do energy healing, all kinds of things we would now call psychokinesis. But I think the tapping into the unity consciousness, if you're one with something, it's much easier to communicate with, commune with, and influence than if you feel separate from nature, let's say. So that plant growing in your hand, if you feel you're separate from nature, ain't going to happen. The dice, you have to even feel they have consciousness. The slot machine all has conscious awareness. Once you're aware of that, then you have the ability to influence quite a bit. But I think the most positive psychological and spiritual energy, and the most powerful one on a consistent basis, is the energy of love. And you could have that and not know a thing about transcendental states.
Right.
And do fabulously. If you have both, you can do some pretty cool things too.
I understand. So your definition of consciousness was precipitated with the idea of it being thinking in your answer. Consciousness perhaps is...
I'm feeling most people equate that too much in my mind with thinking.
Not a bad assumption. I think, even if you open up Webster's, and look up the word consciousness, the first word is going to be awareness, and then there'll be all sorts of offshoots of that word defining consciousness. But I'm hearing that you have a much broader view of this thing that we call consciousness. You spoke of slot machines as having consciousness. You spoke of nature as having consciousness. You spoke of love as being, a form of consciousness rather than an emotion. Am I reading you correctly?
I would put love even more basic. I would say, we break down protons and neutrons, electrons down into quarks and whatever. As they break that further, it looks like it's packets of information. And as you look at those packets of information, most people would then begin to use that word consciousness there. But if you break that down, to me, I think you find love. And so I would say that's the primary ground, the field, if you will, at its basic. Um, as you pop into that, to me, okay, we got oneness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now, if I want to have an experience, I'm going to develop an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
First illusion I might develop is I am separate.
Mm-hmm.
Next might be time and space,
Mm-hmm.
and linear time and space,
Mm-hmm.
and then illusion of having a separate body, and blah blah blah. And then we could have this fun ride we call an Earth Life System ride in Bob Monroe's terms.
Right.
But the core of that is beyond what most psychologists would call consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
starting with, are you knocked over the head and unconscious, or can you talk and aware of what you're going on and respond to stimuli?
Mm-hmm.
They would call you're now conscious.
Right.
Now we could go a little farther and be woke,
Mm-hmm.
be a little bit more aware of some of the things that are interplaying around us societally
Mm-hmm.
and inside ourselves that many people are not aware of. So we are, quote, more conscious
Mm-hmm.
then.
Expanded.
And then we might be aware of ourselves as spirit and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But we get to levels of awareness that I think where words and thinking are bypassed, transcended, or no longer operative very well.
Right.
In my definition of consciousness.
Is that where love falls into it, in that state of beyond concept in your mind?
At its deepest, sure. Mm-hmm. You can also have puppy love and all kinds of cool love.
Sure. You can also be very confused about love and actually incorporate hate into love.
Yes.
I love this person. I also hate them, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I don't know, when we're talking about consciousness, perhaps love is something that I struggle with regards to applying it as an actual definition. But I get the sense that what you're talking about is truthful, in that if the love we're talking about transcends concepts of love,
mm-hmm.
which is why I refer to it as energy. The reason I bring up this assumption of mine regarding consciousness and energy is because of, some of the fundamental psi experiments that we've seen, double slit experiments, that sort of thing, where consciousness, the focus of the participation or willful participation or relaxation of an ego focus that allows for that flow of participation between above and below, God consciousness, universal consciousness, when we get into these diffuse terms here. But a simple willingness to be in relationship to this thing that we're in relationship with, whether it be a human being or a spoon that we're trying to bend, whether it be a desire to do good in the world or a desire to do evil in the world. Events sort of unfold in a way that makes it magical. It implies that we are participating with a something that I'll call a greater consciousness that is unique. It's almost magical. It's different. That's where I was talking about with regards to my thoughts about how we might manifest reality. And I wanted to get in a sense of it because now you're an expert in it. You're doing this. I assume that you're doing this with a very conscious approach to your relationship in the subject-object split of how you experience life, and perhaps the space in between. I'm speaking for you. I'd much rather hear your experience of how you create reality.
Some Indian guy, I don't know if it was Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, he defined love as to be happy with. Mm-hmm. I'm experiencing a usually joyful dance of relationship mm-hmm. with the all, mm-hmm. if you will. Mm-hmm. And that means split into by some amazing divine kaleidoscope into amazingly beautiful configurations of energy. One named Mark Serto mm-hmm. at the moment. Right. And another, the puppy, and another, the bee that might sting you, or the poison ivy. Mm-hmm. Okay. But that there's an energy, it's coming from a place of an energy dance, if you will. Mm-hmm. Being aware of yourself as energy.
Mm-hmm.
And to see the energy flows, um, you know, Mark, I guess part of the place things trip up often is there's paradoxical layers. So there's a layer of good and evil, in which good and evil are highly legitimate concepts
Mm-hmm.
and can kill you or save you.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's layers where good and evil are really not on the radar
Mm-hmm.
of what's going on. So there's a book from Middle Egyptian times called the Kabilian. The
Mm-hmm.
first truth is everything is illusion. Second is everything is real.
Mm-hmm.
Third is the biggest mistake you could make is deciding one of those is truer than
Right,
the other.
right.
Right. So what we're talking about has some paradoxical nature to it. And I want to definitely, I have not taken off from the planet like in a repudiating of physical life as being, you know, not very interesting. That old life is suffering and go to heaven kind of idea, or detachment and the Buddhist idea. I'm not in that ballpark,
Mm-hmm.
but more in, wow, I think I've become aware enough to know that we're in an energy dance,
Mm-hmm.
and that and energy dances are essentially truthful. You cannot BS it. So if you said, "I love you," do what I want,
Mm-hmm.
it will not fly energetically.
Right.
True love
Authenticity.
will.
Right.
Right.
Authenticity is
Yeah.
important. Right.
So there's an invitation to greater impeccability and genuineness,
Mm-hmm.
authenticity, open-heartedness, love,
Mm-hmm.
um, to experience more of the joy of the energy dance.
Mm-hmm. An
Does that help?
observance, yeah, an observance of the polarities and an understanding that these two are not really the whole truth, but they are in relationship to one another, love, hate, etc. So I
Yeah.
came to this idea pretty early on in my explorations. Like you, I had an interest in Western esotericism, we'll call it that, and this thing that we call consciousness and its practical applications. I was in my teens, and I started using meditation as a means to kind of root out the limiting belief systems that I had and the self-images that I had that would keep me from actualizing my goals. Very competitive field, music, you know. So as luck, quote unquote, would have it, I practiced that, and that precipitated me eventually becoming a recording engineer, which was followed by an impulse to move to Charlottesville, which made me want to open a recording studio. And then one day I got a phone call from this strange guy named Bob Monroe, who asked me to help him make his recordings. And that first series of recordings that I was making with him was a series called H+, which I think you're pretty familiar with. And it was in alignment with my thinking at the time, you know, about the power of meditation to affect reality in a certain way, and also have access to my subconscious belief structures and maybe try to reprogram them a little bit. And suffice to say, Bob and I talked about these ideas forever, sitting Brown in the lab just jawing. And he created this program, which then expanded into this thing called Lifespan 2000, which, you know, both of which, because they weren't perhaps transcendent or full of transcendent experiences, they were consciousness explorations of a different nature, weren't quite as popular as the other, you know, OBE or transcendent type of programs that were available. But they were immensely valuable to me, that whole structure. But as memory serves, if I'm correct here, you were actually using those H+ recordings in the early days of that program that you created called MC Squared. Is that true?
Yes. I'm going to go back. You had mentioned the books,
Right.
and I got off track. So the first book, Inner Vegas, Creating Miracles, Abundance, and Health,
Mm-hmm.
tracks going through the Princeton labs out to Vegas
Mm-hmm.
and the formation of MC Squared.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, we use the idea of breath commands, which is from the Human Plus,
Mm-hmm.
to put in commands for whenever you would like to create.
Mm-hmm.
Just inhale, say, plus create, and your conscious waking self, as well as all your chakra system and quantum energy in every cell, will cooperate, your higher self, for perfect creation performance.
Mm-hmm.
We put one in for discreate, We also put one in to activate intuition, um, so that one would activate the heart very strongly for intuition. Um, all of this is highly complicated. So in my second book, Liquid Luck, I said, how do I take 20 years of experience and manifestation and all that and condense it down so somebody could get a taste? First came out a meditation exercise called Liquid Luck. It's about 35 minutes long. And then within weeks, got reports of people winning lotteries 3 weeks in a row, selling houses, finding soulmates, solving engineering problems. So I wrote a book called Liquid Luck, The Good Fortune Handbook, that talks about putting into an energy vial, an energy container within yourself, happiness, gratitude, abundance feelings, compassion to get out of ego, praise, because I think there's no greater higher energy to go than where everything is in the universe is praising everything else, and feelings of good fortune. And whenever you want, just take a drink is the idea in Liquid Luck meditation. And then also the book came out with the stories of Liquid Luck. We've continued to, I've done a whole heart series of meditations, and one called Abundance Waterfall, Abundant Heart. Almost all of them have that type of breath command you had in Human Plus. That, okay, if you want to remember being in your abundance waterfall and being bathed in abundance, all you need to do is inhale, hold your breath, think of the waterfall, exhale, etc. So yes, that has started with your roots with Bob, and I've used it a lot.
Yeah, and you've expanded on it over the years, is what I'm hearing. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and used it also to, in that more transcendental way, where now we have in MC Squared have an exercise. We have a sleepy title called Access All It Is. And Free Flow Access Channel is the name. So you go into your Access Channel, Focus 11, in the Human Plus set, now in touch with all of who you are, from the quantum energy in every cell through your higher self. You now, all of who you are has a potential to access all it is, that it's freely available to you to commune with, to join with, to ask questions of. And people doing that, including myself, when I listened to it the first time after developing it, felt like this huge pipeline between me and all it is. And that it's semi-permanent or permanent. All I need to do is think of that access channel and I can access all it is, so that it's useful for transcendence state as well as the Human Plus kinds of things.
I know exactly what you mean. It puts you in contact with not only your subconscious, but also the superconscious. And that contact, that relationship is being made through conscious mind presencing, directing consciousness towards, the source and directing consciousness to your own limiting belief structures. Okay, so I have a couple of tough questions to ask you. You mind? Okay, so you know that there are many psychotherapists in the world who might be listening to this conversation and assessing everything that you're saying, that we are saying, as being a product of escapism or magical thinking. And you're obviously not of that ilk as a psychologist. And as an artist, I have the luxury of making any strange assertions I like regarding consciousness that people can just write off as, I don't know, mere artistic expression, if you want to put it kindly. But you don't have that luxury as a therapist. And I salute you, first of all, for always taking a stance and going a bit further in the practice of psychotherapy. But I've never asked you, I've known you for a long time, but I've never asked you this question. Being that you're so public with these assertions, I know that other psychotherapists have come to TMI and did their dabblings and found it all interesting, but, would never go public talking about such things. Do you ever face any derision from your colleagues regarding these theories that you present?
No. Probably ignorance would be the, if I'm not resonating there with, say, a standard behaviorist materialistic view, there's plenty of schools of psychotherapy that would allow tapping into things that would be non-material.
Mm-hmm.
And I can talk with the best of them, say the statistical data on the psychokinesis stuff we're talking about is what we call a Six Sigma event.
Mm-hmm.
It would not happen once in a billion by chance
Mm-hmm.
with 40 years of literature. So anybody coming in from a scientific point of view, open-mindedly,
Mm-hmm.
scientific, not debunkers, would I can have a conversation on their level of provability and scientific method and empiricism on this.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped, as I mentioned, seeing clients a good while ago. So this is more talk from the area of, I guess, a life adventurer, philosopher, psychologist, or something. But there's enough stuff going on in the literature that would show that meditation, mindfulness, for example, is beneficial in psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
So we could, put on a suit and tie and go talk in other groups. But I've not experienced derision,
Mm-hmm.
but more I will not look at certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that has been, the people that are most open to this are physicists.
Mm-hmm.
The second most open tend to be experimental psychologists, engineers.
Right.
The psychiatrists come along. Psychologists are probably the more conservative bunch, but still, there's many who've made their profession in this, put their professional lives sometimes on the line for speaking. Their willingness to explore these areas in a scientific way.
Mm-hmm. Charlie Tart comes to mind.
Yeah, and Ross Dunseith is our director of research now up at Monroe. He's an engineer by trade,
right?
But his department has lots of psychiatrists, psychologists in it. Mm-hmm. The people at Princeton Engineering Anomalists that you mentioned, Nelson.
The Paralabs, right?
Paralabs definitely were very dedicated in their work there. So there's room for everybody's opinion, and I don't have to worry about being tarred and feathered.
No, those days are gone. But I've always admired people of your ilk who are willing to put your professional neck out. I mean, I'm a recording engineer and an artist. One would expect these types of comments coming from me. I can talk about consciousness research all day long, and people can blow me off.
Yeah, for a good reason, the training of psychologists is highly conservative, and we do not want to overpromise in a psychotherapeutic way. We do not want to use things and say these are magical tools that do not have any data behind them.
Right.
Because it would be easy to sell people hope and to take advantage. So I respect the rigors of the profession, and then I'm willing to say, well, I can point to this in this study or whatever, versus just saying I'm making this all up.
Right. It's a tough road that people of your ilk have to walk with regards to consciousness and that big conversation. I've always admired you for doing it. It's people like you that allow the scientific community to take a look at this more deeply. And so I have always admired people of your professional background, having the courage to look deeply into such possibilities and the potential of exploring such things as anomalous states of consciousness.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's it goes back to what you want to do to have an interesting life and a meaningful one, and contribute. This is my way. I when I was much younger, at 10 or 12, I was debating whether to be an artist or not, or a psychologist. I don't know if you knew, but I played classical piano and organ, so I played musical instruments. Did a little pathetic work in the visual arts, painting and things. But both roads are interesting, and they converge and diverge at different places.
Well, I guess you get a little Einstein and a little Carl Jung inside of you, don't you?
Yeah, but So it can be kind of fun. So did we cover what you wanted to in this?
We can go down 100,000 rabbit holes, but I know your time is limited, and I got to tell you, I truly appreciate your participation. Also, I truly appreciate, having you as an old friend, and, we've had many conversations along this line. But for now, I'm completely content, and I'm sure that the audience will want to contact you. If they don't know your work, they'll want to know about your books, etc. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to do that?
Well, books are on Amazon, Liquid Luck and Inner Vegas and Heaven is for Healing. My website is called Sync, like the word synchronize, SYNC, and then the word creation, CREATION.com. So syncreation.com with 2 C's in the middle. And there's lots of free tips on energy healing and manifesting and all the kinds of things we're talking about, as well as home study courses and individual meditations as downloads and things. So love to see people there. I still train up in Monroe about 10 weeks a year, so I could see folks up at Monroe. That's a lot of fun too. And we're hoping to start the Inner Vegas workshops again in the fall as COVID settles down.
Wouldn't that be nice? As COVID settles down, maybe one day it will. Maybe we don't need to worry about it. Maybe somehow we can use psychoneuroimmunology to keep our health up and ward off that nasty booger. Anyway, Joe, it was really good seeing you, and thanks for taking the time.
We'll have to do it more often than every 20 years, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. We can go down this rabbit hole as often as you like. We've got a lot of interviews to cover, and you've got a lot of great information that I think the public would really enjoy. So thank you for taking the time today to do it.
My pleasure, Mark, and hope this will be a benefit to everybody listening, and that everybody has a good day. I'm going to end with a saying on my wall that I think is useful right now in our culture. And it says, fear is expensive. Love is priceless. Choose wisely.
Amen.
And with that, I sayonara.
Take good care, Joe. Thanks again.
Be certain to tune in again to Expanding on Consciousness to become informed on the fascinating field of consciousness studies and its applications. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the guests and the host. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Monroe Institute. Expanding on Consciousness is underwritten and produced by the Monroe Institute, copyright 2022, and is broadcast by permission. Reproduction or redistribution without the express written consent of Monroe Institute is prohibited by law. For more information about Expanding on Consciousness, visit our website at monroeinstitute.org or connect with us on the socials. Thank you for listening.